lovely little gemstones, it's Afira, and today I'll be reading A Game of Vice, Chapter 7, written by Coconut Cluster. Chapter 7, After Ever After. Remus always liked high places. The air was different up there. It was more free, untouched by anyone's breath but his, and it was fun to feel it get tighter and tighter in his chest and dizzying in his head the higher he went, climbing until his vision was wonky and reality was a faraway concept, higher and tighter still until everything was clear again. Sitting up on a mountain peak, or a pole, or a tower, it gave him an openness that seeped through every inch of his body. How curious, then, that perching so high now gave him all the tightness in his chest without pushing through to the clarity. He'd started on the staircase. That, of course, gave him no relief, maybe 8 or 10 feet from the ground at most, and, crouching on the railing, watched the carpet turn deep red beneath the body of a dying friend. He watched logical hands and moral encouragements fix the scene, 2 pairs of glasses hiding 2 sets of teary eyes under 2 pairs of furrowed brows, as white was colored crimson again and again, wipes and bandages and pale, pale skin in quick succession. He watched the final step and the exhausted sighs that followed. He watched one familiar face, blank with sleep, and searched in vain for a sign of its slithery smirk or quiet laugh lines or clever twinkle. He watched and he waited for something. The tightness of a climb, the dizzying freedom of the peak, the fulfilling emptiness of open air. But in the end, all he felt was small, so he went higher. Roman's bedroom was on the 2nd floor of the Mindscape apartment, but its ceiling stretched higher than the hallways or any of the others by far, 30 feet up and covered in golden lights that hung from invisible strings like... Roman called them fireflies, Remus recalled after a minute of staring at them. Little fireflies that swayed with the smallest draft. Remus sat on a rafter cleverly hidden by their glow and swung his feet with their paths. Back, forth, a pattern that normally would have driven him to boredom or insanity, but the image of 2 boys in red and green swinging their feet the same way kept him contentedly rooted to his spot. When the door opened hours later, he kept his feet swinging and saw, beneath the blurs, a limping prince. Roman always hid limps so well, managed to keep a steady rhythm just enough to distinguish any flinch or irregularity with that big smile on his face, like he'd never felt pain as anything but an inconvenience, who stumbled to his bed and collapsed onto the sheets, put his head in his hands and shook. His wrists were wrapped in crisp bandages, and Remus's vision was shattered with ropes and blood and fear in eyes like his. Just as he saw his sash sitting prim on a desk across the room, he decided he needed to go higher, and left. His room, walls swallowed by windows overlooking a murky ocean, floors swallowed by an ocean of the miscellaneous. He sat cross-legged on a shelf high above his bed and skimmed the piles covering his carpet, discarded jackets, most of them Romans, crumpled papers and journals with ink-covered pages splayed out, burst pens beneath snap pencils, drawings of golden crowns and crimson castles, and happy faces ripped to pieces and taped desperately back together again. Stuck to one wall were the products of late-night mania, black ink spilling across pages in incomprehensible swirls and slashes, cutting deeper and deeper into the paper until the glass beneath them was scratched beyond repair. One clarity sacrificed for his own always seemed like a fair trade in the moment, even if it ruined his view indefinitely afterwards. The taut tug of a higher altitude escaped him still as he gripped the edge of the shelf until his knuckles were white. Higher, yes, but the air was too thick here. It was still raining outside his tower. Not pouring, not anymore, but a breeze drifted through the sole window and bit his skin regardless. He took a deep, slow breath to swallow the chill. Gritting his teeth against the sharp pain that clawed at his sinuses, he scanned the forest spanning out beyond the tower, eyes catching on a horde of blackbirds huddled beneath twisting branches, wings pulled close but necks craned to point their eyeless faces towards him. One launched from its spot at the base of a tree and soared upwards to land on the window ledge beside him. It didn't need eyes to meet his, tilting its head at him as others followed suit and crowded around the window, blocking what little light the storm clouds let pass, a cacophony of flapping wings and hoarse screeches and scraping claws as they strained against one another to fit through the window. Remus didn't bother to shove them away. The air had been cold, but it was no use waiting to feel something other than the grim blankness gnawing at his insides as he stared into the faces of the birds before him. The next few days passed in a blur. He cycled through peaks and hiding spots and altitudes and shelves and vantage points, returning to the first ones in the hopes that he simply hadn't waited long enough, hadn't been in the right mood. He sat at the top of the stairs, draped in darkness and hidden from sight, and watched as Roman stared blankly at some brightly colored movie, his eyes tracing the animations with as much comprehension as a corpse. Remus pressed tight to the bars of the railing as footsteps shuffled behind him, descending the stairs and slowing to a stop at the couch. Socked feet, silent steps, Virgil's funny vigilance at work as always. He watched as Roman jumped at the hand on his shoulder. watched him mumble an apology for waking Virgil, watched the anxious side settle on the couch beside him and ask something in a low tone, watched Roman's blank gaze turn glassy before he looked down at his bandaged hands and whispered about closing his eyes and seeing birds and feeling a hand pull him back until he gave up on sleep for the third night in a row. Remus watched Virgil tug him to the kitchen and pull 2 mugs from the cabinet, white and black and dotted with gold and silver, and make hot chocolate and tell stories with a playfully annoyed tone until a breath of a smile returned to Roman's face beneath the dark circles and threat of shattering in his eyes. Remus listened to his brothers laugh, and he was gone before their mugs were empty. He returned to the rafters next, stared at a hanging light until his vision was seared gold when he looked away. After it faded enough for him to make out more than shadows, he saw Roman's desk was covered in sparkly green tulle. His sash hung up beside the door, perfectly cleaned and mended from where he'd torn it and stained it with Deceit's blood. He could grab it right then, but that would mean drifting down from the rafters, feeling the pressure build in his chest until it reached his throat and all he could do was curl tight and force choked breath back into his body. All memories of carelessness and freedom abandoned for agony. He'd grab the sash another day. The shelf over his bed again, hours turned to days, ashen sunshine pouring through his windows as the door creaked open, fell shut behind the staggering figure who made his way across the room in slow, careful steps, a hand pressed to his side and the other out to brace himself against anything he could. Deceit wasn't wearing his hat still, and his bangs fell freely onto his forehead in unkempt waves as he focused on traversing the mess of Remus's floor without tripping. His face pinched with the effort. He collapsed onto the edge of Remus's bed at last with a hiss of a sigh, looking around the room as if trying to memorize the decor before he stooped again. Another hiss, a sharp intake of breath, and the hand at his side pressed harder, and set to clearing the pile of scattered trash onto the floor. Remus wasn't one for tidying up, but he allowed Deceit to straighten the mess every once in a while. An odd character, he told Remus once, long ago, that he quite enjoyed cleaning. "Your drawings," he'd said, folding a ripped t-shirt and setting it gently on the pile as he nodded at the papers taped to the window, "are like my cleaning. It helps untangle all the messiness in my mind. It clears my head, I mean. Does that make sense?" And it did, even now. Especially now. The pain in Deceit's face softened as he gingerly uncrumpled papers and set them in a neat stack, folded shirts, laid jackets on the bed beside him to be hung. Even as he clutched the bandages hiding under his sweater, he stretched to grab the acid-green blanket from the floor a few feet away and tuck it primly around Remus's mattress. For the first time since Remus had stared at his blank face, ashen against the blood seeping from his side, he looked content, calm, wondrously lively. Remus watched him grab a notebook from the nightstand, pull a pen from thin air and scrawl something on the first blank page, then set it on the stand again and continued cleaning. An ache filled Remus's chest for some reason, fell to his stomach and weighed him down as he heard yet another breath of pain from below. Too low. He was too low now, too low for anything but the weight, and he was gone. The tower again, looking out the window with a sightless gaze as he gripped the window ledge, melting sunset to broken moon to pallid sunrise and over again, birds swarming in the trees, swooping down and clawing at each other with desperate cries, wind biting his face and whipping his hair back and forth without filling his lungs with its cold freedom. He stood there longest, at that window. He stood long enough to see a door open in the field at the base of the tower, to watch his brother step out and glance around the clearing, Remus's sash draped over his arm and fingers worrying at the paper crown in his hands as he braced himself against the wind and memories that struck him. Remus didn't move from his spot as a bird screeched overhead, but Roman flinched hard enough to stumble, and in an instant he gripped the paper crown harder, held it to his chest, and disappeared through the door once more. And still Remus remained. He liked high places, even without the sensation of old air tearing from his lungs and new air that was his own, filling the empty space it left behind. It was quiet. No indignant cries, no biting remarks, no exasperated sighs reaching his ears, no scathing glares where eyes couldn't find him. No one to be compared to, and no shadow to be left in. It'd be days before he cycled back to his room, finally fell to his bed and looked around at Deceit's work. His floor was visible again. The papers scattered about before now sat neatly pressed flat on his desk across the room, shirts folded and jackets hung in his closet. He reached over and grabbed the journal on his nightstand, flipping through until he found Deceit's pretty handwriting in a short note. "Remus, I was sorely disappointed upon waking to find you disappeared again. You're more than welcome to take time to clear your head, and in fact I encourage it. But I do think, with the least amount of sarcasm intended here, of course, that it's a simple courtesy to be at someone's bedside, couchside, when they wake after you've impaled them. In all honesty, stop laughing, it's a turn of phrase, I hope you're all right. I'd like to finish our talk, preferably without swords this time, whenever you find it in yourself to forgive and meet with me to do so. Stay safe, or at least whatever is safe by your standards. Also, you really should make that shelf wider, else you'll slip off at inopportune times, like when someone is cleaning your room and trying to make sure they don't get crushed if you fall. Yours truly, Deceit. Remus traced the letters, felt the slight indentations in the paper with a shaking finger. He slowly closed the journal and set it back on his nightstand, and went to stare at the ceiling for a bit. Maybe Deceit would come again, and maybe Remus would stay where he was, and maybe it would be okay, beyond the bandages and heaviness and unspoken apologies, when his foot knocked against something. At the end of his bed, resting on the comforter as if arranged with painstaking care, was a sash, spread taut to display its mended quality and sentiment. There was no note with it, but sitting just beneath the sparkly tool was a cardboard sword, a rapier, creased from years of storage, but in surprisingly good condition otherwise. Remus's numbness edged on something painfully existent as he reached out and took the rapier between his fingers. It tugged him down, but it was different than the weight as he sat high over his room and watched Deceit clean his mess yet again. It was grounding, firm and assured and tangible, and somehow his chest was tight like the brink of finished climb. He took a breath, and the air was open. The air was so much more than his alone. Thank you all so much for listening. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to check out other fics this author has written, her info is in the description below. And if you want to hear more of my voice, you can check out my channel. Feel free to use the link below to request what fics I should read on this channel, and I'll see you next time.